Welcome to Nicki Woo Cozy Stories. I'm your host, Nicki. Tonight's story is a soft reimagining of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, a story of quiet discovery, of entering where one does not yet understand, and of learning, gently, what it means to leave things as they are. So settle in and let the story begin. Morning settled over the wood in a pale, unhurried light. The path between the pines still held the coolness of night, and the moss along the stones looked dark and thick, as though it had been drinking from the mist for hours. Ferns leaned over the trail. A drop of water slipped from one frond to another, and somewhere deep in the trees, a thrush was singing in a careful silver thread. Goldilocks walked without much aim beyond the pleasure of walking. She had left the lane earlier than she'd meant to, drawn first by a hedge of wild roses, and then by the bend of a narrow path, then by nothing more than the thought that the morning seemed too lovely to spend inside. She was used to moving as she pleased. Gates were often unlatched, meadows opened without question, orchards offered fallen fruit. The world as she knew it had a habit of seeming near at hand and quietly available. She wasn't a rough girl, nor a destructive one. She didn't tear blossoms from their stems simply to watch them drop. She didn't kick at mushrooms or strip bark from trees, but she had the easy confidence of someone who had rarely been told that a space might be whole before she entered it. When something appeared pleasant, she drew nearer. When something appeared welcoming, she seldom asked herself whether it was meant for her. She followed the path until the trees loosened and the wood opened into the clearing. There stood a cottage beneath a tall stand of birch, its roof low, its chimney built of river stone. Thin blue smoke lifted from the top in a straight, patient line. Window boxes spilled over with thyme and mint. A neat stack of wood stood beneath a side awning, the logs arranged by size. A copper kettle hung from a hook near the door and shone where the morning light touched it. Goldilocks stopped and looked. The place felt cared for in every direction. The threshold had been swept. A bench by the door held a basket of apples, each one polished against a sleeve until one side gleamed. 3 coats hung from the pegs under the porch, one large and dark, one smaller and warmly browned, and one little coat with rounded ears sewn by the hood. She smiled when she saw that, with such a gentle detail that it made the whole house seem softer. Someone lives prettily here, she thought. No voices came through the open air. No dog barked. No pan clattered. The cottage did not feel abandoned, only briefly unattended, as though the day inside it had paused for a walk. That was all it took for a second thought to rise in her. If the household had stepped out, a knock would be no offense. If no one answered, then at least she would have satisfied her curiosity. She went to the door and tapped with her knuckles. Nothing. She waited. The clearing held stillness the way bowls hold water. A breeze passed through the birches and moved the silver undersides of the leaves. Goldilocks knocked again, a little more firmly this time, then listened once more. Still nothing. Her gaze fell to the latch. It was smooth from use, and she touched it, almost idly, as to feel whether the morning sun had warmed the metal. Instead, the latch moved beneath her hand. The door opened inward, with hardly a sound. "Oh," she said softly. From where she stood, she could see only part of the room within. The edge of the braided rug, a square wooden table, the red glow of banked coals on the hearth, but the smell that came out was warm enough to feel like an arm laid lightly around the shoulders. oats, honey, toasted bread, cedar smoke. It was such a home-like fragrance that it did not strike her as a warning. It felt like a welcome, already prepared. She ought to have shut the door at once. Some quiet, reasonable part of her knew that. Yet, the open room beyond did not seem secret or forbidden. It seemed paused. It seemed to belong to a morning still in progress. She stood there longer than she intended, looking at the order of the room, the polished floorboards, the folded cloth near the hearth, the care with which each thing seemed to be placed. Then, because one foot was already over the sill, and curiosity had gone further than caution, Goldilocks stepped into the bear's house. The room held warmth the way some hands do, quietly and without effort. Goldilocks let the door ease shut behind her and stood still until her eyes adjusted to the indoor light. It was dimmer than the clearing outside, but not dark. The fire had been banked low in the hearth, and red coals glowed under a cover of ash. Their heat breathed gently into the room, carrying with it the scent of cedar and the sweeter smell of something recently cooked. Nothing inside was grand, but every part of it felt intentional. The braided rug at her feet had been woven in bands of russet, cream, and moss green. 3 chairs stood around the table, each built in the same style but made to different sizes. One broad and sturdy, one a little lighter in frame, and one quite small, with a cushion sewn in faded blue checks. A row of wooden spoons hung on the wall beneath the shelf of the crockery bowls, and there were herbs drying from a beam overhead. On the sill, a jar of wildflowers arranged with care that suggested that they had been gathered to be enjoyed, not merely set aside. Goldilocks moved a little farther in, turning slowly. She was not thinking, "I should not be here," though the thought brushed the edge of her mind once or twice. Instead, she felt something softer and more flattering to herself. She felt that she was noticing beauty, admiring it, perhaps in a way appreciating what others had made. The house did not look like a place that would be injured by a pair of observant eyes. On the table stood 3 bowls of porridge, each with a spoon resting inside. Steam no longer rose from them, but the air above the oats still shimmered faintly with warmth. The largest bowl was a deep, heavy crock in forest green. Beside it sat a honey-colored bowl of medium size, glazed with a ring of tiny painted leaves all around the rim. The smallest bowl was cream, with a blue line circling its edge, and looked so bright and neat that Goldilocks was immediately drawn to it. "Well," she murmured, stepping closer, "you were expected." That was how it looked to her, as though breakfast had been laid and then briefly abandoned. She imagined the family deciding that the porridge was too hot and stepping outside together into the clearing until it cooled. It was such an easy story to form that she accepted it without much examination. She bent over the large green bowl first. The porridge smelled rich and nutty, with a little butter melting across the surface. She dipped the spoon and touched a bit to her tongue. It was far too hot, and she drew back at once. "Oh," she whispered, laughing under her breath, "that will do for no one but someone with a stronger mouth than mine." The middle bowl seemed more promising. Its oats had been stirred with cream, and a little maple sweetness rose from it. She tasted that one too. Better, but still warmer than she liked, and thicker as well. "Not quite," she said, setting down the spoon. Her eyes went at once to the little green bowl with the blue ring. It looked just right in a way that pleased her before she even touched it. The spoon was smaller. The portion was neater. When she tasted it, The porch had cooled to a gentle warmth and carried a sweetness of honey and cinnamon. The oats were softer, the milk lighter. It seemed not merely pleasant, but precisely suited to the appetite she had brought in with her from the woods. Without reflecting much further, she took another spoonful, and then another. She didn't sit at first. She stood at the table, eating in small, satisfied bites, glancing around the room while she did so. The little bowl seemed almost made for comfort. She noticed the way the morning light pressed through the window glass and made a pale square on the floor. She noticed a basket by the hearth filled with mending, tiny socks, a larger scarf in progress, a button tin. This was no neglected space. It was a place in active use, a place held together by daily habits. Yet, instead of checking herself, Goldilocks only felt more at ease. The house seemed so peaceful, so decent, that she could not quite imagine anyone begrudging her a little taste, a little pause, a little moment of borrowed comfort. She told herself, though not in words clear enough to be caught, that it was hardly taking, that she would be soon gone, that nothing truly important had changed. By the time she looked down again, the little cream bowl was empty. She blinked, surprised at her own appetite. "Oh, I did not mean to finish it," she said aloud, and the room, still warm and composed around her, offered no reply. Having finished the porridge, Goldilocks became aware of herself in the room, as if appetite had briefly narrowed the world and then set it back in place. She laid the spoon carefully in the empty bowl and looked around with a shade more self-consciousness than before. The house had not altered because she had eaten there, yet some small balance had shifted. The table no longer appeared simply arranged. It showed evidence. One bowl untouched, one tasted, one empty. She should leave, she thought. But the thought passed through her like sunlight through lace, visible and without force. The warmth of the hearth reached her shins. The morning walk had left her pleasantly tired. Her curiosity, once invited, had not yet spent itself. She moved away from the table and toward the sitting area near the fire. Here, the furniture came in 3 sizes, echoing the order that she had already seen. A large carved chair with deep seat and wide arms. A second chair with a curved back and a seat cushion sewn in brown wool. And a little chair, painted blue long ago, its finish worn smooth at the edges by frequent use. A shelf nearby held wooden animals lined in a row beside 3 well-handled books. One had a cracked spine, another was bound in green cloth, and the smallest showed careful repairs along its corner, stitched with dark thread. Goldilocks smiled. The house seemed to reveal itself in pieces, and each piece made it more familiar. She ran a finger over the back of the smallest chair. "You are charming," she said softly, as though speaking to the chair itself. The large chair looked heavy enough to swallow her. She lowered herself into it first, out of courtesy to the order she had begun to notice. Yet, the seat was too broad, the arms too wide apart, the cushion too firm. She sat upright, as though in someone else's former parlor. "No," she murmured, rising almost at once. The middle chair received her more kindly, though its back pressed against her shoulders at a stiff angle. It was well built, certainly, but not restful. She rocked once, twice, listening to the faint creak of wood and wool. "Better," she said. "Still, not quite." Then her glance returned to the little blue chair. It would have been wiser, perhaps, if it had looked frail, if it had carried some obvious sign that it was not made for strangers. But it looked inviting, bright, and perfectly placed near the hearth. as if it had been waiting all morning for someone to curl into it with a book. Goldilocks crossed to it and sat. At once, she sighed. The cushion was soft. The back met her properly. The chair held her in a way the others had not, and because it did so, she leaned farther into it than she should have. She let her shoulders drop. She tucked one foot under the other and gave a small, contented rock. The movement pleased her so much that she tried it again, this time with a little more weight. There came a sharp crack beneath her. For one breathless second, the chair seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to forgive her. Then, the seat gave way entirely, and Goldilocks dropped with a startled cry into a scatter of wood and stuffing. She sat still in the wreckage, her heart beating fast. "Oh no!" The words fell out of her at once, stripped of all the easy confidence with which she had entered the house. Splintered blue rails lay at angles around her skirt. A tuft of wool batting had escaped the torn cushion and floated near her knee like a pale cloud. The break was unmistakable. The little chair had not merely been strained, it had been broken. Goldilocks scrambled up and stared down at it. "I didn't know," she said, as though someone were present to hear her. "I only meant to sit." That was true, and yet it did not comfort her as much as she expected. The room, unchanged in every other way, now seemed fuller than before with the lives of those who had belonged there. She could imagine small hands smoothing that blue paint, someone lifting the chair close to the fire in the evenings, someone noticing immediately that it had been damaged. Her first impulse was to set it right. She bent, fitting one piece against another, but the wood would not hold. The leg had split where it joined the seat. The brace had snapped clean through. It was not the sort of break a hurried stranger could mend before the owners returned. A hush gathered around her, deeper than the one she felt on entering. It wasn't threatening. It was worse than that. It was the silence of a room that had been trusted to remain as it was. Goldilocks drew in a breath and let it out slowly. "I should go now," she whispered. Yet, instead of moving directly to the door, she looked toward the narrow staircase at the far side of the room, where the upper floor lay, in shadow and quiet above her. The staircase was narrow and polished at the center of each step by many daily feet. Goldilocks hesitated before it, glancing once toward the door as though she might yet retreat and undo the morning by leaving quickly enough. But the broken chair remained by the hearth, impossible to miss, and its presence stirred a restless discomfort in her. She didn't want to stand beside it any longer. She didn't want to leave with her heart beating so unevenly. Upstairs, she thought, perhaps there might be a washstand, a mirror, a place to collect herself, for only a moment before going. So she climbed. The upper floor was smaller than she expected, tucked neatly beneath the slope of a roof. A long runner lay along the boards, hand-woven in faded red and cream. Sunlight entered through 2 dormer windows and spread in soft trapezoids across the floor. The whole upper level smelled of lavender, clean linen, and pine. Nothing was crowded. Nothing was careless. 3 sleeping spaces opened from the landing. One room held a broad bed framed in dark wood, quilted in deep greens and russets, with a folded blanket at the front and a book lying close on the table beside it. A second room was gentler in tone, with curtains of color of acorns and a patchwork coverlet stitched from old fabric so skillfully joined that their different histories seemed to belong together. In the third room stood a smaller bed under the eaves. It was a quilt that was blue and cream. A shelf above the pillow held a wooden fox, a smooth stone shaped like a heart, and a tiny bunch of dried daisies tied with a thread. Goldilocks paused in the doorway. The small room touched her first because it was so particular. Nothing in it was lavish, yet every object seemed chosen, kept, and loved. The stone on the shelf had not landed there by accident. The fox had likely been carved by someone who knew the child who slept below it. A pair of neatly folded stockings rested on the chair in the corner, and on the windowsill, 3 chestnuts had been lined up in descending size, as if someone delighted in order for its own sake. She stepped back and looked into the largest room. It was handsome, but far too solemn to invite her. The middle room was softer, though its quiet seemed inward, private in a way she did not wish to disturb. When her eyes returned to the little bed under the eaves, it seemed to offer exactly what she wanted. Not ownership, not even real comfort, only a place to sit for a minute, to steady herself after the shock from downstairs. That is all, she told herself. Only a moment. She crossed the room and pressed a hand against the large bed first, testing the mattress. It was firm as packed moss, no doubt good for a body larger and heavier than her own. The middle bed yielded more gently, but the pillows were piled high, and the blanket smelled strongly of cedar and winter herbs. Then she sat on the edge of the little bed. It dipped under her slightly. The quilt was cool. The pillow had been plumped and set straight. She lowered herself farther, meaning only to rest her back against it, and found that the mattress was soft in exactly the way her bones had begun to crave after the long walk. The room itself seemed wrapped in stillness. Through the window, she could see a piece of sky, pale as milk glass, and the upper branches of the birch trees stirring. Goldilocks took off her shoes and tucked them side by side beneath the chair. That, too, she did without much thought. It was the sort of action one makes in a place where one feels safe. She lay back fully and folded her hands over the middle. The quilt smelled faintly of soap and sun. Somewhere below, the coals on the hearth shifted with a soft sigh. Her alarm over the broken chair had not gone away, but fatigue spread over her in a way that a blanket spreads over a table, covering sharp corners without changing what lies beneath. She would rest just for a minute, she thought, and then she would go. She would perhaps leave a note, though she had no paper and had seen no ink. The idea comforted her because it sounded responsible. She might explain that she hadn't meant any harm, that she had been tired, that the porch had cooled and the chair had seemed sturdy. Her thoughts grew slower. The room, with its tucked eaves and small dear objects, no longer seemed like a child's room exactly, but a room belonging to a life still unfolding, carefully watched and carefully kept. That knowledge brushed her only faintly before sleep drew nearer. Her eyes closed. The sounds of the house soft and blended. The wind in the birches, the faint settling of beams, one distant bird calling and calling from the wood. Within minutes, Goldilocks was asleep in the little bed, one hand curled against the blue cream quilt as the bears began their walk home through the trees. The bears had gone out not because they were aimless wanderers of the wood, but because the porridge had been too hot to eat, and the morning too fair to waste while waiting. They moved along a path they knew well, beneath pine and birch and ash, where the ground dipped in familiar places and the roots rose where they always had. The great bear walked first, with an even, measured tread, carrying a walking stick, cut smooth at the top from hazelwood. Behind him came the middle bear, whose basket held mushrooms and mint and a folded cloth in case the little one grew chilled. The little bear went last for a while. Then he ran ahead, then lagged behind to study beetles, stones, and feather shadows on the path. They were not fierce creatures, though strength lived plainly in two of them, and eagerly in the third. Their life together had shaped itself around ordinary care. Fire laid each night and banked each morning, herbs hung to dry, bread kneaded on Thursdays, boots scraped at the door, quilts aired when the weather allowed. They noticed when one spoon was missing from its hook, or when the smallest stocking had worn thin at the heel. Their house was not merely shelter. It was the visible shape of their attention to one another. By the time they turned home, the little bear was hungry enough to begin naming the things he hoped might be waiting with the porridge when they returned. Honey, toasted nuts, more cream. The great bear listened with a fond seriousness that made their recitation sound like a matter of importance. The middle bear laughed once and reached down to straighten the little bear's collar, where it turned beneath his chin. When they entered the clearing, the cottage stood exactly as it ought to stand. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but the windows shone in the mild noon light, and the herbs along the sill stirred greenly in the breeze. For that reason, perhaps, the first sign of disturbance felt all the sharper. The great bear stopped halfway up the path. "The door," he said. It was shut, but not fully. The latch had not caught. A narrow line of shadow marked the opening. The middle bear saw it too. "We left it fastened." The little bear, who had been skipping over the stepping stones, grew still at once. No one spoke loudly. No one rushed. Yet something changed in their movement as they approached the threshold. The great bear set down his walking stick by the bench and opened the door with care. Warm air met them, carrying the scent of oats and cedar, and something else now, harder to name at first. A note out of place, a pattern disturbed. Inside, the room looked almost right. That was the unsettling part. The rug still lay flat. The jars still shone on the shelf. The light still fell across the floorboards in the same pale shape. But the table told its own story immediately. "Someone has been eating my porridge," said the great bear. His voice was not thunderous. It was low and astonished. The middle bear stepped closer to her bowl. "And someone has been eating my porridge." The little bear climbed onto his bench, looked into his own cream bowl with its blue rim, and found it empty. He laid both paws on the table and said, with wounded clarity, "Someone has eaten all my porridge." Silence gathered around the words. The great bear looked slowly across the room. Nothing had been overturned. Nothing obvious had been stolen. Yet, the fact remained. Someone unseen had entered their home, tasted what was theirs, chosen among it, and finished what belonged to the smallest of them. It was not the loss of porridge alone that troubled him. It was the presumption hidden in the act, the ease of it. The middle bear moved toward the hearth and stopped abruptly. "Look!" There lay the blue chair in splintered pieces, the stuffing spilled pale across the floorboards. The little bear made a small sound that was neither anger nor fear, but grief surprised into voice. "My chair!" The great bear bent and touched the broken rail. Fresh wood showed where the paint had split. The damage had happened recently. His heavy brows drew together, not in rage, but in a deeply unsettled sadness. They had built and mended and arranged this room together. Every object had a place because their days had given it one. To see one of those places broken open by a stranger's use felt intimate in the wrong direction, as if a hand had reached into a pocket or a letter. "Someone has been sitting in my chair," said the Great Bear. "Someone has been sitting in mine," said the Middle Bear. The Little Bear stood before the wreckage of his blue chair and swallowed. "Someone has been sitting in my chair," he said, "and has broken it." No one raised a voice. No one struck the table or stormed through the room. The quiet in the cottage seemed deepened instead. It was the quiet of souls taking in the shape of what had happened, letting the evidence teach them where the stranger had gone. Then the Middle Bear lifted her gaze toward the staircase. "Upstairs," she said. The staircase carried their weight differently than it had carried Goldilocks. The Great Bear ascended first, each tread deliberate, one broad paw resting briefly on the rail. The Middle Bear followed with her head slightly tilted, listening. The Little Bear came last, though he wished to come first, his face still pinched with the hurt of seeing his chair broken below. Upstairs, the air was quiet and sun-warm. The landing looked undisturbed at first glance, yet the bears knew their rooms too well to be deceived by first glances. The Great Bear paused in his doorway and looked at the turned corner of the blanket on his bed. "Someone has been lying on my bed," he said. Across the hall, the Middle Bear touched the hollow in her pillow, then the crease in the coverlet, where another body had rested and risen again. "Someone has been lying on my bed." The Little Bear went at once to the room beneath the eaves. His small shoes were always lined against the wall by the chest beside the bed. Today, there was another pair near the chair, soft shoes with woodland dust on their soles and narrow ribbons at the ankle. He stared at them first, then at the bed itself. The quilt had been rumpled. The pillow was indented. Beneath the slant of the roof, in the place that belonged most particularly to him, a stranger slept. "Someone is in my bed," he said very softly. The others came to the doorway and stood behind him. Goldilocks lay on her side facing the window, one hand tucked under her cheek, curls spilled loose across the pillow. In sleep she looked younger than she had while she was wandering through the house below. The line between her brows, formed perhaps by the broken chair and the uneasy thoughts that followed it, had eased entirely. She looked not wicked, not threatening, not even bold. She looked tired, human, absurdly at peace. For a moment, none of the bears spoke. It would have been easy from a distance to call the sight almost tender. A weary traveler fallen asleep in a small bed under a blue quilt while noon light rested on the floor. But tenderness was not the first truth in the room. The first truth was disturbance. She had entered where she was not invited, eaten what was not offered, broken what was not hers, and then curled herself into the heart of the home as though safety were something she might simply step into and borrow. The Middle Bear's face softened before it hardened again. "She's only a girl," she said. "She's in my bed," said the Little Bear, louder now, not cruelly, but because the fact mattered. The Great Bear stepped inside. The boards gave a quiet creak beneath his weight. Goldilocks stirred, though she did not wake. He stepped near the bed, looking down at her with an expression difficult to name. He was not eager to frighten, yet neither could he pretend that gentleness required silence now. He cleared his throat. Goldilocks' eyes opened. For one suspended second, she looked not at the bears, but at the angled ceiling above her, wearing the blank softness of one newly woken. Then she turned her head and saw them in the doorway, the small bear clutching the frame, the Middle Bear with one paw pressed lightly against her apron, the Great Bear standing nearest to the bed, with the noon light behind his shoulders. She sat upright at once. All the blood seemed to leave her face. Her eyes moved from one to another, taking in size, shape, presence, and then leaping at terrible speed through the evidence that she herself had left behind. The porridge, the broken chair, the borrowed bed. The coats by the door suddenly made sense. 3 bowls, 3 chairs. The life downstairs arranged not as a pleasing mystery, but as a home actively belonging to those now before her. I, she said, and stopped. No one shouted. The Great Bear's voice, when it came, was deep and steady. You are in our house. Goldilocks looked down at the quilt gathered in her fist. Yes. The little bear's hurt overcame his caution. You ate my porridge, he said, and you broke my chair. She turned toward him and saw, perhaps for the first time, what she had done measured not by objects, but by belonging. Not a bowl emptied in the abstract, but his bowl. Not a chair broken in a pretty room, but the chair shaped to hold his small body by the fire each evening. Shame rose so quickly in her that it almost felt like heat. I am sorry, she whispered. The words were true, yet too small for the room. She knew it as soon as she said them. The middle bear watched her closely. Why did you come in? Goldilocks opened her mouth, then closed it again. Because the door opened? Because it was warm? Because everything seemed lovely? Because she had not, until this moment, allowed herself to feel that loveliness as someone else's complete and finished world. I didn't think, she said at last, and that was the truest answer she had. For a few moments, the only sound in the room was the wind moving lightly past the dormer window. Goldilocks sat on the edge of the little bed with the quilt pulled around her knees, her shoes still beneath the chair where she had neatly placed them, as if neatness could undo intrusion. The bears remained at the doorway, and just inside it, not closing around her, not advancing further than they needed to. Their restraint only made her more aware of her own lack of it. The Great Bear spoke first. Were you in trouble? She looked up, startled by the question. It held no accusation sharpened for effect. It was practical, almost grave in its fairness. No, Goldilocks said. Were you cold, lost, hurt? No. The little bear frowned, not in anger exactly, but in bafflement. Then why? She drew a breath, felt it falter, and then tried again. I saw the cottage. It was beautiful. I knocked, and no one answered. The door opened, and I thought... She stopped, because what she had thought, no one thing clearly enough to defend, only a chain of ease. I thought no harm would come of looking. The middle bear leaned against the doorframe. Looking became eating. Goldilocks lowered her eyes. Yes. And eating became sitting. Yes. And then sleeping in a bed that was not yours. The words were gentle, but they left her nowhere to hide. Goldilocks pressed her hands together. I know. At that, the little bear lifted his chin a little. You did not know before? He was right. She had known in the thin and ordinary sense that one knows rules. One ought not enter. One ought not touch. Yet knowledge that remains untouched by another person's reality is hardly knowledge at all. It's only habit waiting to be contradicted. Goldilocks looked around the room once more, but this time she didn't see charm first. She saw arrangement, care, repetition, the folded stockings, the daisies tied with thread, the chestnuts lined up on the sill. These were not decorations in a pretty scene she had stumbled into. They were evidence of a life steadily made here, one action at a time. The bed under her was not simply the softest of the three. It was his bed, The bowl downstairs was his bowl. The chair by the fire had been his place. "I thought," she said slowly, "that because no one was here just then, it didn't matter." The Great Bear's expression shifted, not softening exactly, but deepening with recognition. "And now," Goldilocks swallowed, "now I see that everything mattered before I arrived." The words settled over them. The Middle Bear straightened. In her face there remained frustration, and rightly so. But there was something else as well. Relief, perhaps, that the girl before them was not preparing to argue herself innocent. "A home does not become empty because its people step out," she said. "It remains theirs while they are gone." Goldilocks nodded. "Yes." The Little Bear looked at the blue quilt, then at her. "My chair is still broken." "I know." Her voice nearly failed on that. "I am sorry for that most of all." "Why that most of all?" he asked. "Because it was yours," she wanted to say, but the answer had become too simple. "Because," she said instead, "it was made for you, and I used it as though it were just there." The Little Bear considered this in a solemn silence that made him seem older than his size. Then he gave a small, single nod, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that she had at last reached the right place. Goldilocks bent and drew on her shoes. Her fingers shook at the laces. When she stood, she did so carefully, taking care not to pull the quilt further out of line. She smoothed the coverlet, lifted the pillow, and set it straight. These small acts did not repair anything important, but they were the first things that she had done in the house, with full awareness that each object belonged within a pattern not of her making. "I will go," she said. The Great Bear stepped back from the bed to let her pass. "You will?" She hesitated at the doorway beside the Little Bear. "If I can mend the chair," the Middle Bear answered with honesty rather than ease. "Perhaps, but not today." Goldilocks accepted that. A promise offered too quickly might have become another way of comforting herself. Instead, she bowed her head once, not theatrically, but with the quiet humility of someone who had finally understood the difference between admiration and permission. And as they descended together, the house felt changed again. Not safer exactly, for it had always been safe to those who belonged there, but clearer. Goldilocks saw the shelf of spoons, the flour jar, the folded cloth by the hearth, and each thing now seemed to hold a boundary she had once mistaken for invitation. She stopped beside the broken blue chair and looked at it without touching. "I am sorry," she said again, this time to the Little Bear, and this time the apology had weight enough to stand. The Great Bear opened the door, and afternoon entered in a wide band of mild gold. The clearing outside looked almost exactly as it had when Goldilocks first arrived, the birch leaves turning their pale undersides to the breeze, the stepping stones warm in the light, the herbs along the sill moving gently in their boxes. Yet to her, it no longer appeared as a pleasant discovery waiting to be enjoyed. It appeared as the outer edge of a life she had crossed without invitation. She stepped onto the threshold and then paused there, one hand on the doorframe. Behind her, the bears remained inside. None of them pressed to hurry her, but neither did they pretend that a conversation still needed extending. The moment for understanding had come and passed. What remained was the quieter work of letting it settle where it belonged. Goldilocks turned back once. "Thank you for waking me." The strangeness of those words was not lost on her. Thank you not for kindness alone, though there had been kindness in the way they had spoken, but for ending the dream in which she had moved through another household as though comfort were a thing detached from ownership. The Great Bear gave a single grave nod. The Middle Bear said, "Take care where you enter next time." It was not a scolding. It was a sentence meant to travel with her, and she felt that it would. The little bear stood nearest the hearth, one paw resting on the table edge. He didn't smile, but some of the sharp hurt had left his face. Goldilocks wished, absurdly, that she could set a bowl of porridge back before him, warm and perfect as it had been before she touched it. Because she could not, she only said, "I hope your chair may be mended soon." He looked at the splintered blue pieces on the rug, and then at her. "I hope so too." Goldilocks stepped down into the clearing. The air outside felt cooler than before, though the day had warmed. She crossed the stepping stones more slowly than she had climbed them. At the edge of the porch she noticed her own footprints in the light dust where the threshold had been swept. They troubled her. Such a small sign, and yet it said plainly that someone had come through this ordered place, leaving marks she had not thought to consider. She brushed at one with the side of her shoe, then stopped. The gesture was foolish. One cannot erase carelessness with one more careless movement. So she let the marks remain and walked away. The wood received her quietly. Moss softened the path. The birds had turned to afternoon songs, lower and fewer than in the morning. Goldilocks moved beneath the trees with a different rhythm now, no longer wandering simply because wandering pleased her. She noticed gates where before she might have noticed only flowers. She noticed fences half hidden by bramble, the stacked stones marking field edges, the way even wild-looking places sometimes bore the subtle arrangement of someone's labor. A bee-box stood near a sunny patch of clover. A line of laundry shimmered behind a hedge farther down. Everywhere there were signs that lives extended beyond what the eye first gathered. When she reached the lane, she turned once and looked back toward the wood, but the cottage was no longer visible. She didn't feel chased from it. She felt corrected by it, and strangely, steadied. Behind her, in the house she had left, the bears began the gentle work of restoration. The middle bear gathered the broken parts of the blue chair and laid them in order on a folded cloth. The great bear set fresh water to warm and measured oats in a pan for another small bowl of porridge. The little bear fetched his glue pot and a tiny set of pegs, hopeful now that repair, though not instant, might be possible. They didn't spend long rehearsing their offense to one another. The facts were plain. The house had been entered, their things had been used, a boundary had been crossed. But the day still moved on around them, asking for practical care. Soon, the scent of oats rose again in the kitchen. The cloth by the hearth was shaken out. The upstairs quilt was smoothed and turned back to air. A new order formed where the old one had been disturbed. Not identical, perhaps, but true to the same hands. And down the lane, with the sound of leaves at her back and the memory of the blue chair vivid in her mind, Goldilocks walked home more carefully than she had come. By evening, the cottage had resumed its familiar breathing. The fire had been built up again, not high, but enough to lay a steady amber light over the hearthstones and the lower beams. Outside, dusk moved through the clearing in blue layers. The birch trunks turned pearl gray. The herb boxes on the windowsills gave up their warmth to the cooling air, and the last birds folded their songs into the hush. Inside, the bears had done what could be done for the day. The little bear's bowl had been refilled, and though he had eaten the second porridge more slowly than he might have in another mood, he had eaten it all. The broken chair could not yet bear weight, but it had been cleaned and set together with pegs and careful pressure on the kitchen table, where the great bear had aligned each split piece, and the middle bear had wound cloth straps around the joints to hold them tight overnight. It looked wounded, but not abandoned. That mattered. After supper, the little bear stood beside the table and examined the chair and its bindings. "Will it be the same?" he asked. The great bear considered before answering. "Not exactly. The middle bear laid a paw on the back of the child's shoulder. But it may be strong again. The little bear nodded. This seemed to satisfy him, though not with cheerfulness. Some losses are easier to bear when they are named plainly. Later, when the dishes had been washed and the spoons hung back in their places, the bear settled near the hearth in the 2 remaining chairs on the thick cushion drawn close to the fire. The room no longer felt violated, only tender in a place that had been struck. The middle bear took up her mending. The great bear opened the green cloth book. The little bear leaned against the broad side of the larger chair and watched the flames for a time. And after a while he said, "Why did she think she could?" No one pretended to understand. The great bear closed the book across one paw. "Perhaps because she saw comfort and thought first of herself within it." The middle bear threaded her needle through the small heel of the stocking. "Perhaps because no one had yet taught her to see the work inside a room." The little bear looked around the cottage, at the wood stack, at the drying herbs, at the folding blankets, the scrubbed table, the repaired box on the shelf. "But it's obvious," he said. "To those who live by it," the middle bear answered. The little bear was quiet then, considering something beyond his years and yet exactly suited to them. She looked ashamed. "She was," said the great bear. "Is that enough?" The fire made a soft sound as one log shifted deeper in the coals. The great bear looked toward the table, where the little blue chair stood wrapped for mending. "Enough for what happened? No. The chair is still broken, your morning was still troubled, but enough to begin learning? Perhaps." The little bear accepted that too, not because it erased his hurt, but because it gave a place to rest. Far from the clearing, Goldilocks sat, that same evening by her own window with her hands folded in her lap. Supper had been served and cleared away. Her own house, which had always seemed ordinary to her, now showed itself differently. The worn edge of the table where generations of sleeves had rubbed the finish thin. The cup her mother favored, chipped near the handle, and always set in the same place to dry. Her father's boots by the back door, turned inward so the leather would keep its shape. She had lived among these signs all her life, and yet tonight she saw them in the same thing that she had finally seen in the cottage. Not scenery, not convenience, but the visible trace of people belonging to one another through use and care. On the stool beside her lay a length of blue ribbon she had meant to braid into her hair tomorrow. Instead, she picked it up and turned it over through her fingers, thinking of the small blue chair by the fire. She wondered who had painted it first. She wondered how many evenings it had held the little bear before she sat in it, as though it were simply the most pleasant option available. "I didn't know," she said softly into the room, but the sentence no longer comforted her. Not knowing was its own kind of failure when it came from never having looked closely enough. She set the ribbon aside and opened the window a little wider. Night air entered, cool and fragrant with earth. Somewhere beyond the gardens, beyond the lane, beyond the wood, 3 bears were likely settling into sleep in their restored house. The little bed under the eaves turned down once more, the morning's disturbance folded into memory, but not forgotten. Goldilocks hoped they would sleep well. In time she rose, checked the latch on her own door, and laid a folded cloth over the bowl left to dry by the hearth. Small actions, ordinary ones, yet each seemed newly meaningful, part of the quiet language by which a home says, "We are here. This is ours. We keep it with care." When she finally went to bed, she didn't carry fear with her. She carried awareness, gentler and more lasting. And in the hush that followed, the world itself seemed changed only by becoming more legible, full of doors, paths, rooms, and lives that asked not for suspicion, but for reverence. So the night settled, soft and complete, over cottage and village, over bears and girls alike, and order, once disturbed and then restored, gave itself back to rest. Now the cottage is quiet again. The fire has lowered to a gentle glow. The chairs are still. The little bed beneath the eaves is smooth and waiting for dreams. And outside, the trees stand silver and calm beneath the evening sky. What was unsettled has been settled. What was disturbed has been gently restored. And the world, in its quiet wisdom, has returned to balance. Somewhere in the distance, a girl carries home a tender new understanding that not every lovely thing is ours to enter, and that care lives in the places people make for one another. So now, you may rest too. Let the forest grow dim around you. Let the path disappear into softness. Let the windows darken, one by one. And let sleep come gently, without hurry. There is nothing more to hold, nothing more to solve. Only stillness now, only warmth, only rest. Sleep now. You are safe. You are loved. You've been listening to Nicki Cozy Stories, created by Nicole T. Woodard. May your dreams be gentle and your sleep be deep.